Welcome back to the channel, little flexers. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. My name is JW Crewall, aka FlexDaddy, and this is the best place to be to learn about the Pokemon TCG and have some fun along the way. Now, the Latin American International Championships just wrapped up this weekend, and it was a doozy of a tournament. This was the first tournament with Paradox Rift legal, and we were bound to see some ancient and future Pokemon make waves at this tournament. Now, there were a lot of really interesting lists that, as I was watching the streamed games and following players' results all over the weekend, I have to bring to your attention because there are just some wild things going on here that I think you'll be very interested in. So we are going to take a look at the lists from the top 32, or at least some of the lists that have been posted publicly, and I'm going to show you what players were adding to their decks and how they were changing things up with the new set release. So let's get right into it. Before we begin, I want to give a huge shout out to the website that I'll be using for this video, PTCG Legends, a fantastic site if you want to look for results and deck lists and all that good stuff. Here we have the top 32 from the Latin American International Championships, and at number 32 is a fellow content creator, Kato A, also known as Alessandro Cremasoli, with their stall deck. Now, this is going to be just a quick overview because this stall deck is very different from the stall archetypes that I have played, so I don't want to comment too much without really knowing how this deck works. But as you can see here, has opted for the Pidgeot EX and Luxray V package. I think that gives you a lot of flexibility, frankly. With the double turbos, you can attack with the Pidgeot to maybe get rid of paths that your opponent is trying to play. Of course, you're also playing your own stadiums, but obviously you want to be using the quick search ability as much as possible on the Pidgeot. So really interesting list from Alessandro. I like the Luxray to be able to mess with an opponent's hand if they're playing something like Baxcalibur that in the stall matchup really relies on that superior energy retrieval. Obviously have the 4 Arven here and a bunch of those disruption supporters. So really cool list here from Alessandro, and I wonder if this might be more of the standard moving forward for stall decks. I love the Pidgeot. Being able to search out any card for stall is very valuable, especially when your opponent's trying to Iono or judge you out of good hands. So really interesting list, and I'll be curious to see if any of these concepts take hold moving forward in other stall lists. In at number 26 is Nick Moffat's Charizard deck. Couple interesting things here in Nick's deck, and I actually really like this build of Charizard as opposed to the Pidgeot builds, although the Pidgeot-based builds did a little bit better. So again, I wonder if more players will gravitate more towards Pidgeot or whether they will stick with Bibarel. But what I thought was interesting about this Bibarel engine, this Charizard deck from Nick, was that he's only playing the one TM Evolution. You can see it down here. A single copy of TM Evolution. I feel like when I've been playing the deck, I like to have at least 2 so that I don't have to burn my Arven as my supporter to get that tool, and I can use it to get maybe a Forest Seal Stone or a Vitality Band or whatever other tool I might happen to be playing. But just the one makes it a little bit risky, and you're just less likely to start it in that opening hand to get your Pokemon out. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the Vengeful Punch tool. I don't find myself using it that often in Charizard, but obviously is pretty good in the Gardevoir matchup, so can understand why he included it here. Other interesting thing, and I don't have any idea why this would be the case, but Nick opted for a 2-1-1 split of Charmander. In my eyes, there's a really good case for the 70 HP Charmander that does 40 damage, because again, if you're playing against a Gardevoir, you want to be doing that additional damage if they go up with a big Gardevoir, with Shining Arcana Gardevoir, and then knock out your Charizard EX, then you can maybe get a response knockout with a Charmander, put them on odd prizes, and make it kind of funky for them to close out the game. So I get this Charmander. I also get the other 70 HP Charmander because it has a first attack that allows you to discard a stadium for 1 single fire energy. So pretty good when you're facing a deck that plays Path to the Peak. So I understand those two. I don't understand the 60 HP Charmander. So if anyone has any guesses on why that is being played, especially as a 2 count, please let me know. Otherwise, the list looks pretty standard. You got a Jirachi from the newest set in the list as well. Prevents against things like Sableye sniping your bench, one of the major problems with Charizard. And I think this is just a solid list overall. Probably the jumping off point for me. I will take some of these concepts into my Charizard deck heading forward. In at number 24 is Duncan Crowley. Now, we saw Duncan on the stream. He was streamed in day 2, I believe, and he had a fantastic finish here in Latin America. I mean, it was really quite the sight to see, because I feel like this was the tournament. I had talked about this in my tier list video, but this was the tournament that I felt like Mew had a great chance to perform. And Duncan even said in his post-game interview that he had been playing this deck pretty much nonstop. And so it was a no-brainer of a choice for him to play Mew to this event. And he did really, really, really well. Obviously, a top 32 finish, nothing to scoff at an IC. So pretty standard list. I mean, here you have, as a DTE Mew player, you have a lot of ability to play the disruption supporters. So you're seeing the 3 Judge, the 1 Roxanne, the 1 Iono. That's very heavy for disruption, but you can make it work when you're only playing 11 Pokemon. And then you have, of course, the 4 Path of the Peak, which is pretty much the standard for your Mew decks. Duncan opted for a Box of Disaster. That tool, if you get knocked out and you're at full HP, it'll put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So could be good in the Gardevoir matchup. I think predominantly used for Mew in the Charizard matchup, so you have at least a chance. If they get a Charizard going, you can one-shot them in return. Put 8 damage counters on them. They start with 330 health, so you only need to hit 250, which is 2 power tablets to knock out that Charizard in response. So that maybe came into play. Duncan did mention that he went positive against Charizard on the weekend, at least at the time of his stream game. So I wonder if that held true throughout the rest of the tournament. He also played a Justified Gloves, just speaking of Darkrai. Just speaking of dark decks like Charizard and Roaring Moon, Justified Gloves gives you another way to modify your damage to be able to hit those numbers to knock out those Pokemon. So really nice list here from Duncan, and fairly standard, I would say, for DT Mew players. Coming in at number 21, we have Brian Devries, a very notable player from Europe, traveled all the way over to Brazil and got himself a top 32 finish with a very nice looking Gardevoir list. Now, I gotta say, a lot of the Gardevoir lists that I had been seeing were pretty standardized throughout the weekend. A few of the things that I had been seeing from these lists was, of course, the Screamtail and Luxurious Cape combo. That seemed to be something that a lot of players gravitated towards for this tournament. I think it's a really great addition for the deck. It's very hard to stop for most decks. Some decks don't even play Mana Feast, so your Screamtail is just going crazy out there. And in certain situations, you can even take knockouts on multi-prizers with that Luxurious Cape, allowing you to attach a lot of energy to your Screamtail. So really cool. And then, of course, for the mirror, we see Cresselia in the Pokemon lineup as well. I think that's a great choice for Gardevoir moving forward, because we should see a lot of Gardevoir representation, and you want to have that option in the mirror to go into a Cresselia. What I don't love about the list is the Mew, frankly. I think if you're leaning into Mirage Step, you could probably cut the Mew. Not the biggest thing. I think Mew gives you that extra consistency, but if you're really playing Gardevoir and you're leaning into Mirage Step, I don't necessarily think that you need Mew. Fine to include it. I don't hate it. It's nothing. It's a great list, and obviously he did very well with it, and Mew is pretty standard in Gardevoir. But I almost wonder if we could start cutting Mew for other tech Pokemon. Maybe Jirachi was something that I know Andrew Mahone, who also played Gardevoir, that was a card that he might have wanted. So maybe you cut the Mew, fit in some other cards like that. The other thing that I don't love about this list, and again, not a huge critique because some lists play 2, some lists play 3, but that's Brian playing 2 Rare Candy. I think 3 should be standardized because, especially, again, if you're leaning into Mirage Step, what can happen is you have a Curly in hand, or you have one prized, or you discarded one earlier off an Ultra Ball or something like that, and you aren't able to get all of your Curly in play, well, you need to have those rare candies to be able to get into your Gardevoirs, right? Additionally, you want to be able to get the first attack in the mirror. And so I feel like having a third rare candy enables that so much more. Obviously, it's like a 50% increase in the amount of rare candies that you play. So that turn 2 attack can be really helpful in the mirror. It can be really helpful against Lost Box. I mean, frankly, there's not a deck that I can really think of that you wouldn't want to get a turn 2 attack with, or even to put hands on or put up pressure against an Iron Hands, right? If they come in and get a turn 1 knockout with Iron Hands, like, you need a way to respond to that. So I just feel like 3 rare candy, although it's, frankly, against Iron Hands, it's probably a pipe dream that you get up to 230 on that second turn of the game. But I just feel like you need to have that option. And so I like the 3 rare candy. The other thing that I don't love about the list, but I get, is no Zacian. So I think Zacian in many cases can be almost a win button for a lot of decks. It sets up checkmate very easily, where you throw up a Gardevoir with a ton of energy on it, and then you just slam your Zacian down on the bench, and now you don't have to hunt for another Pokemon to take a one-shot knockout, a one-hit KO. So I really like the Zacian in my Gardevoir list, but again, really hard to argue with results. Brian, great finish for you, and we'll take a look at another Gardevoir list here coming up. In at number 14, we've crossed that threshold into top 16, is Ian Robb with his Chien-Pao Iron Hands EX deck. Very cool list, and something that I haven't seen a lot of players online do is shift to a single basic Lightning Energy with Earthen Vessel. But I think it makes all the sense in the world. Earthen Vessel is great pretty much all the time for any deck that plays basic energy, if you can fit it. And especially for a deck that wants to rain energy down on the field with Baxcalibur, you want to hit those Earthen Vessels early, and you want to get your energy out and into play and on your Pokemon and attached when you have Baxcalibur access. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the 2 Earthen Vessel and then cut down to 1 basic Lightning. Because I feel like what we had seen was 8 basic waters, and you're hoping to search those out with your Chien-Pao, and then just 2 basic Lightnings, and you kind of just hope you draw into those, or maybe you play an Energy Search, or I guess 1 Earthen Vessel. But I like this build. I mean, it's, frankly, in terms of the energy counts, that seems completely fine, and the 1 basic Lightning is chill. Like, you're not gonna prize that thing. Don't even worry about it. Don't even manifest that into existence. Just believe in yourself that you're not gonna prize the 1 Lightning when you need it. 4 Cross Switcher, 4 Superior Energy Retrieval, 4 Ultra Ball, 4 VIP Pass. I mean, it's weird how much this list is like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and yet still bricks as often as it does. But great finish from Ian. I think this is a solid starting point if you're looking to get into Baxcalibur, if you're Baxcalibur curious, as one would say. Great list here, and very nice finish from Ian. In at number 13, this is probably the strangest list in this entire top 32, and that's from Anil Saini. Saini? I hope I'm saying that right, Anil. But we also saw Anil on stream, and he just blew the bricks off his opponent with his 18 Lightning Energy build of Miraidon. This build is all gas and absolutely no brakes. It's kind of wild what he's trying to do. So some of the things, as a fellow Miraidon player, some of the things that really jump out to me. Only 2 Miraidon. I had actually been telling this to my testing group. We were trying to come up with, the night before Toronto Regionals, some cuts. And I'm like, well, guys, we're already playing 4 Ultra Ball. We're already playing a Nest Ball. Like, what if we just cut a Miraidon? And that idea quickly got shot down. But it works here for Anil because he's going crazy. You look at the ball search, he's got the 2 Ultra Ball, but he also has 2 Battle VIP Pass. Really interesting. Again, it's like a first turn or bust kind of deck for Anil. He's really looking to get that turn 1 Iron Hands, and frankly, in matchups that go longer than 3 turns, I'm thinking like Charizard decks are pretty hard to beat. Gardevoir decks can be pretty hard if the game gets really drawn out. But if you're able to get a turn 1 Iron Hands against those decks, those otherwise, even to slightly unfavorable matchups become very favorable for you as the Iron Hands player. So it's a really cool list. Again, the 18 energy is wild to me. I will be experimenting a little bit more with higher energy counts now that Iron Hands has proven itself in the Miraidon deck. But 18 still, I don't think in a million years they talk about the, monkey on the typewriter and how if you give it enough time, it would come up with a full Shakespearean novel. I don't think if you put me at a keyboard for a million years that I could ever come up with an 18 energy Miraidon list. So hats off to Anil for a really, special and unique list. The Battle VIP Pass, frankly, I don't understand it, but again, if you're only going for turn 1, then technically that's a little bit better than getting like a nest ball. So I kind of get it on that sense. And then if you look at the supporter counts, very wild as well. I really disagree with the 2 bosses orders, but if you're just trying to win on the first turn, who gives a crap? And then you got your 3 Arven, you have 1 Research, which just feels like a sore thumb. You got the Raihan, you got the Peony. I guess these are all options that you can use your Luminion to go grab, but they feel so wonky. The Peony was fun though. He did play it on the stream game. That is an idea that I might try to carry over to future Miraidon lists where, although Anil is not playing Mew, maybe there's like a Mew Peony combo to be had. I'm not sure. But I think what this list demonstrates and Anil's finish demonstrates is that there is room in the game for a kind of go off on turn 1 deck. You see the 2 Squawk ability, like that dude is not missing a turn 1 attack. He can't, right? It's just there's so much gas in this Miraidon deck. So really fantastic finish from Anil. Very interesting list, and I think there's a few concepts here that I might mess around with myself as a fellow Miraidon player. At number 7 is Kato A. So now we were in the top 8 finishers. This is the more standardized version of Snorlax. I was talking about Snorlax stall a little bit earlier with Alessandro's list, and Kato's is a little bit more what I'm comfortable with and what I'm used to and what I'm used to seeing, what I'm used to playing. Very standardized for Snorlax, looking to just start that every single game, and then 3 other Pokemon. You obviously have the Mimikyu, great card in a lot of matchups. You got the Rotom for some additional draw, and then 1 Pidgeot V for those times that you want to use your Forest Steel Stone, but you don't necessarily want to commit to a V Pokemon being down on your field. So this is a little bit more standardized. If you're looking to play stall and you're like, well, what should I prepare for? It's probably more this list than Alessandro's, but again, it's really, I frankly think that Counter Catcher opens up so many avenues for stall decks that we should start seeing even more innovation with the list. While this is a little safer and did net Kato a higher finish in the tournament, I don't think that necessarily discounts what Alessandro was able to do with his stall list. So really interesting, 2 different builds and both getting very solid results at LAIC. So I like this list a lot as well. Coming in at number 5 is an interesting, very interesting Lost Box deck with Roaring Moon. Now, Roaring Moon, I think a lot of players were worried about it heading into LAIC, where, man, is this really going to be a deck? Is this a better Miraidon deck? Is this just a turn 1 blow-up deck? And it actually ended up being pretty fake, which, I mean, again, not to toot my own horn, but I did predict that Roaring Moon would have pretty high representation in day 1. And just kind of fall off a cliff heading into day 2. And that's exactly what happened. We really saw no straight dark Roaring Moon lists perform that well into day 2. But Brennan was able to take a list that featured Roaring Moon to a top 8 finish. Now, in this deck, you're, of course, trying to enact the standard Lost Box strategy of going in with Cramorant, following it up with the Sableye, maybe using a Charizard at the end of the game. But then you also have this one-hit option with the Roaring Moon. I think it's fantastic the way that this list is built to potentially go behind on prizes. You see the couple of counter catchers. I almost wonder with Brennan as he's playing if he's trying to set up a bunch of damage with his Sableye such that as his opponent's taking knockouts, he can kind of take, 4, 5, 6 prizes at the end of the game by like stalling up different Pokemon with the counter catchers and spreading a lot of damage on the field. I'd be really curious to see how some of his games went, because that's what I feel like this list is trying to do, where it's built around consistency, like a standard Lost Box Charizard deck, but then you have counter catchers, boss to like maybe cheese your opponent a couple of turns. And then you have the one-shot potential of the Roaring Moon, which I really like. Players were talking about that a little bit. I think this is maybe a great showcase of the power of Roaring Moon, because in most matchups, you might not even want to play that down on the field. But there are some matchups where it makes a lot of sense. Again, with the counter catcher, you have much easier access to your opponent's bench Pokemon. Going with the Roaring Moon at the right time, take big knockouts. Really interesting list from Brennan. Probably not an archetype I would personally touch, but if you're looking to play a Lost Box deck, you might want to give this one a shot. And speaking of Lost Box decks, we have Gabriel Veloso's 4th place list from LAIC. This is a fairly standard Giratina deck, but of course, including the counter catchers as one would expect from the list. A little bit higher count of energy than I have seen in some of the Giratina lists that have been posted, with the 4 basic psychics. I feel like that's pretty standard. 3 basic grass is pretty standard. 2 waters is generally what I'm seeing, but here he has 3 to open up a little bit easier plays with the Radiant Greninja, and then of course 4 Gen Energy. I feel like some players are cutting back on Gen Energy, but I like the 4 count as well here. So from Gabriel's list, things that I like, just it's a great archetype. Like, I think this is a tier 1 archetype. I think more players should be playing Giratina. I would have a few minor tweaks. He goes very heavily into the Lost Vacuum count, which I think is a little bit different from a lot of Giratina players that I have seen in the online sphere or have posted their list from LAIC. But really nothing wrong there. I think that is more of an innovation from the Turbo Box lists, where they're playing 2 or 3 or maybe 4 Lost Vacuums. It just seems to me in this build, there is only one real target, if I'm not mistaken, for Lost Vacuum, and that's going to be Path of the Peak. But you want to have Path of the Peak in play generally against your opponent. So I think again, really hard to argue with the top 4 at an IC, but that might be some wiggle room if you're looking to adapt this list to your liking. I think you could probably cut down to 2, maybe even 1 Lost Vacuum. Of course, it helps accelerate your board for things like Sableye, for the Cramorant in the early turns, but there's nothing else for you to really get rid of. So I don't know, it seems a little bit risky, and maybe I'd be curious to pick Gabriel's brain on how it worked for them. But top 4 finish here with Giratina, and very interesting list from Gabriel. In at number 2 is Noah Sawyer with their Entei Iron Valiant deck. This was a deck that I really did not like heading into this tournament. I thought that Iron Valiant was a complete joke, complete gimmick, really like a tier 3 deck. I thought that its best ability to win came on the first turn, and that if you were able to get out of the first turn with like a big basic deck, or you had multiple Pokemon in play, that you frankly weren't losing that game. But Noah proved me wrong, and I think a lot of doubters wrong, with his Iron Valiant list. So taking a look at the list, you obviously want to include as many switching options as possible, and that's exactly what Noah did. You have 4 Switch Card, 4 Escape Rope, 4 Switch. It's just maxed out on being able to put as much pressure with the Tachyon Bits ability on that Iron Valiant as possible. Of course, you have your Medicham and your Radiant Charizard as alternate attackers to back up the Entei V. And then 1 TM Devolution for those turns that you want to, potentially take multiple knockouts, right? On your opponent's side of the field. Like maybe they've rare candied a couple of Ralts, or maybe they have Charizards in play that came into play via rare candy. So just a really nice option for you in this deck, because otherwise you're a relatively mediocre deck in terms of damage output. I mean, if we think about Entei, you're maxing out at 220. If we think about Radiant Charizard, you're maxing out at 250. you know, your Metachamp V is attacking for 20 damage. Like, you don't have a lot of high-end damage potential, but it's all those incremental damages with the Iron Valiants that are going to add up turn after turn. That really makes this deck formidable. So congratulations to Noah on a finalist placement at LAIC. And I think, again, like, if you're looking to play this deck, just start here. Start here. Don't deviate from this list until you really understand what Noah was trying to accomplish, because I think as the first player to have a result with this deck, you should just take it for what it is and try to really understand what Noah was going for with this deck. So if you do pick it up, please, please, please play like 10 games at least with this archetype in its current state, and then make your changes. I think what Noah has here is really consistent, really strong. And yeah, just a fantastic finish for Iron Valiant. Congrats. And at number 1, the top finisher from LAIC, I couldn't be more happy, is Jho Kama with their Miraidon deck. Now, if you squint hard enough, if you really, really squint, you might see some similarities to the deck list that I won Toronto Regionals with. So things that I kind of immediately notice, okay, 1 Raichu V, 1 Super Rod, 4 Ultra Ball, 1 Nest Ball, the 4 Switch cards, the 1 Seal Stone. You know, there are a lot of counts in this list that I'm like, okay, you know, not to say that maybe they built it from the ground up, or maybe they took my list and made a few modifications for the new format. In either case, congratulations to Jho for their fantastic finish. I think there's a couple things here that make a lot of sense for this new format, though, and things that I wasn't necessarily on. So congrats to Jho, again, for seeing Miraidon in a way that I wasn't quite seeing it in this new format. So one of the main things that I think about is the Zeraora, and that is going to be better against the evolving decks, particularly the Gardevoir decks, which I know Jho played a lot of and beat most of. That's going to be much better into that matchup than the Flying Pika. I had been on the Flying Pikachu because you can attach a 4 Seal Stone to it. You can paralyze things with it. But I think right now with the amount of Gardevoir, it was like 25% of the day 2 meta. I think with the amount of Gardevoir, it just makes more sense now to play Zeraora over Flying Pikachu. So I like that innovation. I also, of course, like Iron Hands. I had thought Tapu Koko might be the play for the tournament, but it turns out Iron Hands is just way too good. It actually won. Miraidon also won in the senior division as well with Iron Hands. So it makes a lot of sense there. Now, one thing that I am curious about for Jho's list is that, you know, when we were testing Iron Hands, we had thought, okay, Iron Hands is good. The double turbo energy is good, but I maybe would have played a Raihan. Now, I don't see Raihan in Jho's list, and I question that just slightly. On the one hand, why mess with a good thing, right? Like, we had already, I felt, kind of perfected Miraidon to the point that you have a base list, right? So, and we weren't playing Raihan in the prior format. But in this format, just to be able to search out the DTE and get your Iron Hands a little bit, you know, more quickly powered up, I guess, in one turn, I felt like the Raihan was necessary. Obviously proving that that's not the case here with their IC winning list, but just something I would keep an eye on. Maybe we'll see Raihan creep back into lists. Now, there are some, you know, of course, differences between this list and the list that won seniors and the other list that got top 16 in the Master Division. And that kind of centers around the energy counts. In the senior division, the winner played 2 double colorless and double turbo, sorry, old head here, 2 double turbo and 14 basic energy. And then, of course, Anil with the 16th place list or top 16 list played 18 basic energy. So to see Jho play 13 and 1 double turbo, I just wonder how frequently you're finding that single double turbo, and should it just be another basic lightning energy? I don't know. Clearly worked out really well for them, and I'm stoked. Congratulations to Jho for a fantastic finish in Latin America, because anytime a Miraidon player wins, feels like I'm winning as well. So those were some of the best decks from LAIC. Leave a comment down below on which of these decks that you're going to try, which one you were most surprised by, which one you were most impressed by. I think there's a lot of cool things from Paradox Rift format, and we're just barely scratching the surface of what this set has to offer. So if you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, but I'll catch you on the next one. God bless. If I don't see you soon, I'll see you later. And remember, good luck and also have fun.